Nuku was jailed for life with 18 years non-parole for the murder of Dean Stewart Brown at Wellington's Oriental Bay in 2010. Bob McCroskey, the leader of Family First, says that fatherhood isn't a right, it's a privilege based on the person's ability and commitment to being an active and responsible dad for that child. This is a complicated one.
It is.
I mean, is it a right? Is fatherhood or is parenthood a right? Who wants to take that? Emma, you can go first.
Well, I was because the first little bit of reporting I read on this, I was unclear about what the donated or what the sperm was intended for. So I thought, because he talked about wanting to donate organs and blood as well, and I thought, oh, this is, maybe he's trying to do a nice thing, and that maybe he was donating to a sperm bank. But then it transpires that he actually wants to start a family, and I'm not sure how I feel about that.
But I think it's one of those complicated things. I don't think that parenthood is a right, but I don't think it's not a right either, because if it's something that we control, that is a slippery slope to a lot of, I think, very dangerous things. So, in the circumstances, I guess they have to look at, is that something they're actually going to allow to happen in a prison within that? And that's the end of it. So, what he does outside his life, what his partner chooses to do, that's none of our business, quite frankly.
And I think Calvin Davis was on Morning Report today, and he was talking about, penal reform broadly, but just the role of, I guess, the outside world and rehabilitation of prisoners and giving people something to hope for, to change for. And so, this guy, maybe put that to the side for the interests of the kind of broader discussion, that, couldn't that be a good thing if you give someone a reason to rehabilitate?
The idea of donating organs or blood, that seems like, more people we need people to donate both organs and blood.
Like
yeah, and it is this is quite a serious, gesture to make. So if there's an altruistic sort of urge growing in him, we should encourage it.
Let's go one last quick story. We talked about smoking yesterday in Japan, but companies selling tobacco are increasingly feeling the pinch. So sometimes, as businesses do, branching out to other products. There's a whole lot of new restrictions coming in the UK, including plain packaging and menthol cigarettes being phased out by 2020. As a result, sales are falling. Imperial Tobacco announced on Wednesday that it sold 5.7% less tobacco in the 6 months to the end of the March than it did in the same period this year. So to combat this, they're looking at growing the market for caffeine energy supplements. Instead of nicotine, people might turn to caffeine.
What, they're going to do no dose or just basically Mountain Dew with heaps of caffeine and sugar in it?
That is essentially what it sounds like. It's a tablet, a powdered tablet that sells at £3 for 4 doses. Each shot contains about as much caffeine as a double espresso.
Oh, look, that's just wonderful. That's going to be so good for people's health. Yeah, they're really thinking about that.
Can't they do something less villainous?
Yes, exactly. It's just like they're rubbing their hands and going, wahaha, while they're thinking of this,
What's
honestly.
the next thing we can move on to?
I'd never heard of caffeine powder, but I had a look online, and the FDA in the States put out a warning about it a couple of years ago.
It can turn you into speed, effectively. It's had terrible side effects.
Great.
Some of us can't live without it.
And on that note,
first thing in the morning. But on that particular note, thank you very much for joining me, Emma Espiner and Catherine McDonald. On the panel tomorrow, Finlay McDonald and Julia Hartley-Moore. It is 1 minute to 5. It's time for Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight reports that Queen Elizabeth's entire staff have been called to, and I quote, a highly unusual emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace. All sorts of speculation, but all of it seems to be hosed down by Buckingham Palace itself. We go live to London for the latest. Jerry Brownlee's first outing as Foreign Minister, but what did he say to Australia's Minister Julie Bishop about tertiary fees, a murderer who bashed his victim to death with a hammer, petitions Parliament for prisoners to be able to donate blood and organs, and for him to be able to father a child from behind bars. Myrtle rust, a disease that damages plants, including pohutakawa, is found in New Zealand's mainland, on the mainland, for the first time, in a checkpoint investigation into religious education in state schools.
RNZ News at 5. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The head of Christchurch Prison, John Roper, and 2 senior staff have been placed on special leave. It comes as the Department of Corrections launches an investigation into security procedures at the prison. Conan Young reports.
In a statement, the department's Southern Region Commissioner, Ben Clark, says he has recently become aware of potential non-compliance with security procedures at the prison. He's ordered a review and appointed another manager as head of the facility while this is carried out. Mr Clark says although there is no suggestion the prison's security has been compromised, it's extremely important that all aspects of security procedures are complied with. Corrections is declining to comment further. Christchurch Prison houses just over 900 inmates and is one of the country's largest jails. In Ōtautahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
The Ministry for Primary Industries says it will do everything in its power to stop the spread of a new fungal disease that could devastate Pohutukawa and Manuka. Myrtle rust has been confirmed in a young Pohutukawa in a kirikiri nursery, which is now in lockdown. The disease has been killing myrtle species, including eucalyptus and bottle brushes in Australia, and could affect rata, feijoas and guavas, as well as Pohutukawa and Manuka here. The Ministry's Director of Readiness and Response, Jeff Gryn, says it's been preparing for the arrival of the wind-blown pathogen since 2010. He says a team of 20 is now in Kirikiri to try to stop its spread, though the odds are not good.
That said, I have looked at the case studies of Australia and they believe they had an early opportunity in a nursery which they didn't actually take, and that is one of their regrets. We don't intend to have the same regret.
Jeff Gryn says the ministry needs to talk to anyone who's brought a Pohutukawa or other myrtle species from a kirikiri nursery in the past month to call its hotline. A lobby group is blasting Jerry Brownlee following his first overseas engagement as Foreign Minister today. It's accusing Mr Brownlee of rolling over and adopting the Australian government's position on its education changes. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
Australia caught the New Zealand government off guard when it announced this week that it would stop subsidising New Zealand tertiary students whose fees will now more than triple. Mr Brownlee met with his Australian counterpart Julie Bishop today to discuss this. He now says she's probably right that the changes, which include giving New Zealanders access to student loans, will lead to more New Zealanders accessing higher education there. The lobby group Oz Kiwi says tertiary education changes are the biggest slap in the face to New Zealanders in 15 years, and that Mr Brownlee simply rolled over and adopted Australia's position. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
The police have been investigating a series of email bomb threats to Auckland schools. They say they've searched 4 North Auckland schools today and found nothing of concern. Inspector Jason Homan says the threats are not credible, but officers are looking into where they may have come from. He doesn't think they're related to a series of automated threats sent last year. A civil defence report into the Kaikoura earthquake has found the event generated a wave nearly 7 metres high in Goose Bay near the town. The report released today said because the tsunami happened at low tide and the land was uplifted by the quake, the impact of the tsunami was reduced. Civil Defence said in Goose Bay the wave run-up onshore reached as high as 6.9 metres above sea level, and several other locations experienced a 3 to 4 metre run-up. It said the tsunami that was generated has been largely attributed to the Handley Fault, although other faults and offshore landslides may have contributed. Buckingham Palace has told RNZ News it has no comment on reports of an emergency meeting called for all royal staff. Britain's Daily Mail and Daily Mirror are reporting that staff from all royal residences across the country have been ordered to London, sparking frenzied speculation on social media. The Mail says the meeting will be addressed by the Lord Chamberlain, the most senior officer of the royal household, as well as the Queen's private secretary. A spokesperson at Buckingham Palace said there is no comment at this time. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says he has not been briefed on anything regarding Buckingham Palace. It's 5:05. The New Zealand coach, David Kidwell, has hit back at Australian criticism the Kiwis have not helped promote tomorrow night's Rugby League test in Canberra, saying they're focused on playing the game. In his weekly newspaper column, Australia coach Mal Meninga said he was baffled by the Kiwis' decision to be based in Sydney for the early part of the week, leaving the Kangaroos to handle all the promotion in Canberra. But at an awkward media conference in Canberra this afternoon, Kidwell, sitting next to Meninga, said the Kiwis had done their bits in the build-up to what is unlikely to be a sellout match. There'll be a 7-strong contingent of New Zealand riders competing at the prestigious badminton horse trials when competition starts in England tonight. 4-time badminton winner Sir Mark Todd, who was the best performed of the New Zealanders last year, finishing 4th, will compete on 2 horses, Leonidas and Campino. Sir Mark, who's now 61, became the oldest winner of the event in 2011 and is optimistic he can extend that record.
Driving in and when you first come here, still gives you that same buzz, and riding out into the park for the first time, it's just really exciting. So, I would hope they've all been placed well at 4-star level before. Leonidas, this is his 4th time here. So, I'm hoping that we're going to have a good result.
Sir Mark Todd. And the former All Black and Manawatu back, Doug Rollerson, has died following a long battle with cancer. He was 63. That's the news.
Apologising.
The more time you spend here, the more you contribute to the community, the more taxes you pay, the less welcome you are.
Questioning.
It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election, but honestly, it wouldn't change the decision.
Judging.
I've lived in many parts of New Zealand, and honestly, they are, I find Christchurches, they don't have any patience.
Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the transport futurist who says the cult of car ownership is almost over. And after 10, spades not guns. How the man known as the Gangster Gardener is transforming his LA hood and communities everywhere. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Med Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland and Auckland, fine spells and isolated showers clearing tomorrow. Waikato and Coromandel to Taranaki and Taihape, including Bay of Plenty, fine spells. A few showers mainly in the west, clearing early tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered showers developing south of Napier this evening with hail possible. Showers spreading north overnight, then clearing from the south tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, scattered showers developing this evening, clearing early in the morning. Marlborough and Nelson, Buller and Westland, a few showers clearing and fine weather tomorrow. For Canterbury, a few showers becoming confined to Banks Peninsula this evening, then clearing early tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, a few showers, clearing Fiordland, Otago and inland Southland this evening, mainly fine tomorrow, and for the Chatham Islands, showers easing tomorrow evening. It is 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Well, we're all over the shop tonight, Anna Thomas, because we're beginning with the most unusual state of affairs. Here's what we can tell you. And to be frank, it's not terribly much. Some hours ago, the Daily Mail reported the Queen had called servants from royal residence across the country to be in London for, and I quote from the Daily Mail, an emergency meeting. The Mail then claimed the Lord Chamberlain, the most senior officer of the royal household, as well as Her Majesty's right-hand man, Private Secretary Sir Christopher Geit, will address his staff. This has not been followed up by any broadsheets, The Times, The Guardian, nor is the BBC reporting on it. The tabloids are picking it up, and it has provoked a wave of speculation with reports from France, who knows what they know, stating that Prince Philip is dead. English media then reported that Buckingham Palace sources, and remember it's 6:05, 6:10 in the morning there, are flatly denying this, and the French reports are unsourced. Prince Philip is 95, but he opened a new grandstand at the famous cricket ground Lords yesterday, and those there say he seemed in fine form. In short, whatever is happening, it is unusual, and it's provoked feverish speculation in some quarters and pointed, almost disdainful silence in others. UK correspondent Adam Gilchrist joins us now to try and make sense of what, if anything, is going on. Adam, it's lovely to have you with us on Checkpoint. It's 6:10 in the morning. What on earth is happening? Do you have a clue?
Yeah, trying to make sense of Twitter, that's a tall ask, isn't it?
Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Or indeed of the French media, who, as you say, are indeed reporting that the Duke of Edinburgh has died. He was, as you say, pictured yesterday. So was the Queen. because the Prime Minister met with her to start the whole election process, to start the formal election process here. So both, therefore, seen in relatively fine fettle within the last 24 hours. I suppose the point about a meeting of an entire household is that if it's just Buckingham Palace, you think, well, they're there anyway. They probably have these meetings all the time. But it's the idea of trekking down from Balmoral and at short notice. I have to say, though, a colleague of mine has contacted Buckingham Palace press office, and they have nothing to say. And to be honest, they wouldn't have anything to say whether anything was true or not.
No.
So what could it possibly be, I suppose, apart from illness or death? Although death seems unlikely, given, as I say, both of them being pictured yesterday. The other thought is that maybe illness or a removal from duties. Could the Queen actually be abdicating? Now, there's a thought, unthinkable thought in many ways, but I suppose it's on the agenda if all this is true.
Yes, the Daily Mail being the source. Look, how reliable are they on matters royal?
Well, I suppose most newspapers like to sell copies of their editions.
Absolutely.
They're not selling copies.
Yeah.
Because, after all, they haven't got it out in print for the morning editions. They couldn't get anywhere near, and these rumours appear to have only surfaced in the last couple of hours or so. And so they're nowhere near any of the newspapers. As you say, the BBC's not reporting it, nor is Sky News. There's no official word on it. So they're looking at sources and inside sources. And yes, it's absolutely possible that somebody within the royal household made a phone call or vice versa, and, a couple £100 exchanges hands regularly for just little tip-offs about things. It's sort of part of the way the world operates. But a number of others have now followed up. The Mirror website, the Star website, as you say, French media. I don't think the rest of the European media will be very far behind. But it is, unfortunately, at this stage, all speculation.
Yes,
all
it
we
is.
know
Yes, it is.
for sure is that they do have such call-outs. Members of the royal household have been called to emergency meetings before. The Lord Chamberlain is allowed to do that sort of thing. And also we know that there have been rumours before. In fact, it was only just before Christmas. There was a rumour about the Queen. Remember, she had a very heavy cold, had to miss...
That's right, she didn't go to church, did she? Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, she missed out on that. So that actually led to a denial from the Buckingham Palace press office. So they haven't done any denying yet, but then they wouldn't. They move slowly, and probably quite rightly so.
There was, I think I read it in The Guardian, Adam, and I'm absolutely certain you would have read it, the most extraordinary description of what happens when Her Majesty herself dies, and there are all these codes, London Bridge is down, and the way the protocol and the way it works. Now, this wasn't describing Prince Philip, and we have to state, and it's really important we state, that we're talking about two human beings, and there is nothing to substantiate any of this discussion so far. It's just a most unusual set of affairs that seems to be unfolding. But what would the protocol entail? In other words, if something serious has happened, setting aside the Daily Mail source who may be completely off the track, how would we find out?
It's an interesting thought because I suppose the last high-profile royal to die was the Queen Mother, and before her Princess Margaret. And when the Queen Mother died, it absolutely fell into that whole protocol business, whereby various media outlets were tipped off a few hours before, only a few short hours before. It was on a Saturday, as I recall, and it was to allow everyone to get in place the formal announcement. And actually, from that point, once the media's tipped off, then all the protocols then kick in. In other words, the obituaries are lined up, solemn music is played, or in the case of pop radio, sensitive material is removed. If there are any songs, you don't play the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
All that stuff happens. But actually, as well, at a certain stage, a formal notice is put on the gates of Buckingham Palace, which is quite an odd thought in this day and age. But obviously things will move more quickly than that. But that will be one of them. But otherwise, it all just slips into the formal reporting, the simple statement. And I guess in this day and age, it won't just be the sign on the gates. There will have to be more than that.
Yeah.
But frankly, it's not unlike it would have been a couple of 100 years ago.
Amazing. Adam Gilchrist, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And as I keep saying, and I really do think it's worth reporting, This came from the Daily Mail. Other tabloids have picked it up. The broadsheets have not. The BBC has not. And there is nothing official coming from anywhere. So, in fact, there may be nothing going on at all. But I've certainly not seen the like of this, even given the British tabloids' propensity for rumour mongering. We will update you the moment we hear anything more definitive. The Prime Minister, Bill English, was asked about the situation a short time ago. He told media he hadn't been briefed on anything from Buckingham Palace, but he said he would expect to be briefed on anything of constitutional significance. That amazing article with the code, London Bridge has fallen and all that stuff that I think was in The Guardian describing the protocol, does include briefings for Commonwealth leaders of anything of great significance has happened. Let's change the subject to something we can speak more accurately, definitively and factually on, and that's Jerry Brownlee, who met with the Australian Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's been blasted for his first outing. Critics have accused him of rolling over and adopting the Australian government's position on its controversial education changes. From next year, the Australian government will treat New Zealanders as international students and charge them international fees, meaning the cost of getting a tertiary degree for many New Zealanders is tripling. But Mr Brownlee now agrees with the Australian government that its tertiary education changes will probably lead to more New Zealanders accessing higher education across the ditch because they can now get a student loan. Our political reporter Benedict Collins has been looking at this.
Jerry Brownlee met with his Australian counterpart Julie Bishop today in Sydney, after the New Zealand government was caught off guard by changes Australia made to its tertiary education system. In a pre-budget announcement this week, Canberra said it will stop subsidising New Zealanders' tertiary education from next year. Many students will go from paying $7,000 a year to more than $25,000. The New Zealand government had no idea the change was coming, but today Mr Brownlee says he now understands why.
I appreciate it's very difficult if you're putting together a budget that you can't necessarily go off and having international bilateral negotiations about what's going to be in that budget. So I think this is a bit of a one-off.
Ms Bishop says Australia's higher education reforms will benefit New Zealanders because they'll now be able to access student loans.
New Zealanders across the board will have greater access to what is a very generous higher education loans program, and so my expectation is that more New Zealanders will be seeking to obtain a degree from an Australian university.
And while he confused her with the Prime Minister, Mr Brownlee agrees.
As people become more familiar with how that scheme is going to work in the future, I think the prediction made by Prime Minister Bishop is probably going to be right.
Mr Brownlee's comments infuriated the chairman of the lobby group Oz Kiwi, Timothy Gasson, who says the tertiary education changes are the biggest slap in the face to New Zealanders in 15 years.
This is by far the most substantial change that's happened since 2001, and the New Zealand government's response is to roll over, and not just to roll over on it and accept it, but to actually go out there, as Brownlee was today, and essentially take the Australian government's talking points and say, oh, well, how this isn't too bad because actually it'll encourage more Kiwis to go and study in Australia because of their generous student loan scheme. It's frankly a load of nonsense.
Labour's education spokesperson Chris Hipkins feels the same way.
Oh, I think New Zealanders will be disappointed by that. Jerry Brownlee clearly seems to have just rolled over and let Julie Bishop tickle his tummy. I think that New Zealanders would want to see that Jerry was sticking up for them, and clearly that's not the case.
The New Zealand government says Australians studying here will continue to pay the same fees as New Zealanders. More than 12,000 New Zealanders study at tertiary institutions in Australia, while last year 4,600 Australians were studying at universities here. For New Zealanders living in Australia, the education changes are just the latest blow. Depending on when they arrived in Australia, many New Zealanders cannot access social welfare benefits or the National Disability Insurance Scheme despite paying taxes. Nor can they apply for jobs within the Australian military. However, in most circumstances, Australians in New Zealand have the same rights as New Zealanders, in the spirit of the traditional approach both countries used to take. As a snapshot, more than 1,000 Australians claimed about $180,000 in benefits here in a single week last December, which, if annualised, would cost New Zealand taxpayers more than $9 million. For Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
We turn now to Carl Nuku, convicted murderer, currently serving life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. He's petitioned Parliament to be able to father a child from prison using artificial insemination, and for prisoners to be able to give blood and donate organs. Corrections Minister Louise Upston has said she doesn't support it. The petition has roughly zero chance of success in Parliament. And an unscientific poll conducted by NZME received a large number of votes, overwhelmingly against, I think 95% or something. Corrections has issued a statement saying there aren't legal restrictions preventing prisoners from donating blood, organs or sperm, but nor will they support it. And there are practical impediments, not the least of which is that prison populations contain a greater than usual percentage of intravenous drug users, hepatitis sufferers and so on. More on that in a moment. There are also larger issues about a shortage of organ donors. Boy, that's familiar in New Zealand. More on that too coming up. But first, Trevor Mallard, the Hutt South MP, and why he presented the petition.
Because I was asked to, and I think it's a responsibility of members of Parliament when asked to present petitions to do it. We're sort of like postmen or post people. You pass stuff on and leave it to the committees of Parliament to sort out what's done with it.
And so Parliament can make its decision around the merits or otherwise of the petition?
Yes, I don't think it's a job of an individual MP to make value judgments around a petition.
Even when it's being presented by a convicted murderer?
Yeah, yes. Probably especially. I mean, I knew that Nuku was in Paramoramo, didn't inquire into his crimes. Obviously, with publicity today, I'm reminded of what they are. It doesn't indicate any support for the petition whatsoever. I mean, the right to petition is sort of like an ancient right that used to be there for citizens or subjects with kings way back before Parliament existed. And I think it's pretty important that the petitions are presented. As I say, it doesn't mean that they get a hearing or get supported. And I think it's unlikely that this petition will be supported in full by the Parliament.
Trevor Mallard, will return to him shortly. But as a general rule of thumb, prisoners are getting fewer rights rather than more. The right to vote, for example. Prisoners can't. You can't even register to vote from prison. Prior to 2010, prisoners were only excluded from voting if they were serving a sentence longer than 3 years. Blood donation, well, prisoners used to many years ago.
We used to do mobile drives in just the same as we do in other venues.
Exactly as the blood bus might turn up at a workplace. But Sam Cliff, CEO of the New Zealand Blood Service, says prison populations present certain challenges.
We have very strict eligibility criteria for who can and cannot donate. So certain health, lifestyle, for example, intravenous drug users are permanently precluded from giving blood. If you've had a piercing or a tattoo, it's a 6-month stand down. So there's various other things that you'll probably be aware of in terms of lifestyle choices. So the prison population also has a higher rates of hepatitis, for example. So although we screen every donation, if you're having a larger than expected in the rest of the regular population level of those kind of conditions, then they're probably not the best population. We want healthy donors. We want very healthy donors. And it really is not a cost-effective way of getting blood to go to prisons.
Organs, well, New Zealand's rate of organ donation is low, although it's creeping up. But living donors must be healthy and compatible, and donors where the brain is dead, 55 last year, or where the heart has stopped, 6 last year, a total of 61 nationwide, are most likely to be found in the intensive care units of hospitals, not in prison. If someone from prison ends up in ICU, they're brain dead, their organs healthy, the same general protocols would be followed as with anyone else. Therefore, Carl Nuku's most meaningful contribution as a potential organ donor might be to leave explicit instructions with his family that he wants to be one. And in and out of prison, that applies to us all. And here Nuku's petition speaks to but doesn't practically address a larger problem, a shortage of organ donors. And here, Trevor Mallard understands the imperative. Would he take an organ from Carl Nuku?
If I needed it, if I needed a kidney, if I was going to die without having that kidney, or my life was going to be badly affected by not having the kidney, of course I would.
Those waiting for kidneys, hearts, lungs, livers, whose lives depend on it and may end without it, might well agree. But as for the petition and Parliament's response to it, as an individual MP, do you support it?
I think there are bits of it that are worth looking at. If I had a relative with say a rare kidney disease and needed a kidney transplant, and there was a prisoner with a match, I think that would be useful. Same with blood, rare blood types. Often I know, because members of my own family have them. There are rapid searches by the blood service for particular blood types, and so I think both of those would be useful. I think the sperm donation I'm not comfortable with that.
This is, in short, a story with a larger issue than Carl Nuku's involvement, a convicted murderer who bludgeoned his victim to death with a claw hammer. His petition grabbed the headlines, but beneath them a fact remains. There aren't enough organ donors in New Zealand. And, while they have your attention, the New Zealand Blood Service has a message for you.
25,000 donors a year leave the donor panel either because they get too old or because they become ill or because they move overseas for various reasons. So we're always looking for new donors. It's a wonderfully altruistic, caring thing to do for society. And if people can and they meet the eligibility criteria, and our nurses are very, very, very calm, very, very sensitive about asking you all the right questions very, very privately to assure that you do meet the eligibility criteria, then we really encourage people who are fit and well and want to give a little something back to spend, in case of whole blood donation, a few minutes of time to donate blood.
Sam Cliff, the CEO of the New Zealand Blood Service. It's 26 and a half minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Just want to make one observation about what's happening in the UK. So Breakfast TV and all of those things, Breakfast Radio now unfolding in the UK. They're 11 hours behind us at the moment, so it's coming up to 6:30. And none of the BBC, ITV, the broadsheets, none of them are reporting these rumours out of Buckingham Palace. The Daily Mail started it, tabloids have followed up, the French have followed up. But really interesting, the people in the UK who simply are not reporting it at all. We will keep an eye on that, but their silence is pretty striking. Coming up on the program, religious education in state schools, what is taught and who oversees the curriculum? Is there one? Why Wellington is losing more than $1 million a week as a result of the Kaikoura earthquakes, and Myrtle rust, a disease that damages plants including pohutakawa, manuka and Feijoa trees, has been found on mainland New Zealand for the first time. It is nasty. This stuff will have more on it coming up. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Email us, of course, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we are on Facebook. You can watch us on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50, and on Face TV, Sky Channel 83. We covered this last night and we could not believe your response. A Checkpoint investigation into the teaching of religious studies in state schools. Well, today we've gone back and we've discovered that the classes focus only on Christianity, and in some cases there is little or no oversight into what is being taught to children. A Christchurch mother told us on the program last night she withdrew her children from a state school after they were told they would go to hell if they didn't believe in God during a religious education class. And the government is being taken to the Human Rights Review Tribunal over a claim its education legislation is incompatible with the Bill of Rights Act. So how many state schools offer religious education, and what exactly is taught? Zach Fleming investigates.
More than 600 state primary schools teach Christianity, but most don't teach about any other religion, and there's little or in some cases no instructor oversight. They are trained and police vetted, but almost all of the 2,500 instructors are unpaid volunteers.
We would like to do it every 3 years. We would like to check all of our teachers, ones who have been teaching for a long time. The resource we have of people and staff is our challenge.
But so can you say, as a flat, every teacher you have is reviewed X amount of time, or?
No, I couldn't. Yeah, but if there's ever any concerns or issues and a red flag is raised, say, we will be in there
Tracy Kirkley is the Church's Education Commission's school manager. The CEC offers all state primary and intermediate schools free Christian instruction classes. It's the largest religious instructor in the country.
There'll be a story, maybe an activity. The books here, we've got workbooks, so the children can sort of, do some stuff out of the workbook, and our teacher will be, talking some things through. Perhaps they might do a game, there might be a song, and at the end, there may be a prayer of which the child doesn't have to pray.
You heard Tracy mentioned red flags. Some have been raised in the past. Paul Bennett's daughter was given Christian instruction by the CEC at Point View Primary in Howick.
She told her that when asked, she said, I don't believe in God. And the adult responded in front of all the class and the other pupils by saying, oh, well, then you're going to hell.
And Christchurch mother Tanya Jacob withdrew her children from a state school for similar reasons.
We knew there was going to be these Bible classes, so we just opted out. Over time, we found that our kids were being put back in, and we found that the kids were being told things like you're going to hell and just generally badgered for not believing in God.
That's not indicative of all 2,500 CEC teachers, though. At Belmont Primary in Auckland's Devonport, its religious instruction teacher is a former parent. Lessons are half an hour on Fridays for 30 weeks a year. That's 15 hours in total a year. Bruce Cunningham is Belmont Primary's principal.
Our children that attend love it. It's a very, very positive experience for them. And they always leave happy.
Roughly a quarter of the school's 280 students between years 3 and 6 opt out.
70% wanted to keep Bible in schools. So it was a kind of a mandate for us to keep the program running. We've probably got 80 children of that 280 that don't attend, and we split them into two groups of 40, and they just go off to a class for half an hour and do other curriculum activities.
And then there are those incredibly unhappy about it. The Secular Education Networks filed a case with the Human Rights Review Tribunal, saying the teaching of solely Christianity is religious favouritism and breaches the Bill of Rights. So what New Zealand's primary school children can and can't learn about, as far as religion is concerned, could soon be decided by a court. But Miss Kirkley says that's not necessary. She says the CEC has no problem with other religions being taught. She says it simply offers Christianity to schools, and it's up to them if they accept it or add other religious classes too.
The RI time doesn't specify it being Christianity religious instruction. It's RI in the broad sense of whatever religions people practice and believe. And we know of schools in secular schools, where other religions are being taught within that RI time.
So we put that to the Prime Minister, Bill English, who is a practising Catholic. Does he think all religions should be taught in state schools, or just Christianity, or no religion?
It's up to them to sort it out. A lot of them wouldn't. A lot of them don't appear to teach, religious ideas because that's how they do it. So look, if they're teaching religious ideas, I don't have a strong view about what they should be teaching. I mean, as it happens, New Zealand is based on concepts that come from Christian religions, and I think it's good if children understand that, but they also need to understand other ways of seeing the world.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
It's 27 minutes to 6. Coming up, Nona with business news and the story about myrtle rust, which damages plants including pohutakawa, manuka and fijo. It's been found on mainland New Zealand for the first time. We have a report after business news, but before all of that, headlines with Anna Thomas.
Thanks, John. A review of security procedures at Christchurch Prison has been ordered. At the same time, the jail's head and 2 senior staff have been placed on special leave. The Correction Department's Southern Region Commissioner Ben Clark says he has recently become aware of potential non-compliance with security procedures at the prison. The Ministry for Primary Industry says it will do everything in its power to stop the spread of a new fungal disease that could devastate pohutakawa and manuka. Myrtle rust has been confirmed in young pohutakawa in a kirikiri nursery, which is now in lockdown. The disease has been killing myrtle species, including eucalypts and bottle brushes in Australia, and could affect rata, fijos and guavas, as well as pohutakawa and manuka here. Buckingham Palace has told RNZ News it has no comment at this time on media reports of an emergency meeting called for all royal staff. Britain's Daily Mail says the meeting will be addressed by the Lord Chamberlain, the most senior officer of the royal household, as well as the Queen's private secretary. A civil defence report has found the Kaikoura earthquake generated a wave nearly 7 metres high in Goose Bay, near the town. It says because the tsunami happened at low tide and the quake uplifted land, the impact of the tsunami was reduced. Other locations had a 3 to 4 metre run-up. At least one person has serious injuries following a collision this afternoon between two cars at Clareville near the Wairarapa town of Carterton. Diversions are in place on State Highway 2 between Hughes Line and East Taratahi Road. The serious crash unit is on the scene and the road is likely to be closed for some time. Wellington has been ranked the best place to live in the world. A study by Deutsche Bank, which looked at the quality of life in 47 cities, ranked Edinburgh second, with Vienna third and Melbourne fourth. And that's the news.
Well, they'll get no argument from me. Let's turn to Nona Peltier now with business. Thanks, Anna. What are we looking at today? The BNZ's result.
Yeah,
right?
The Bank of New Zealand came out with their result today.
ANZ yesterday.
ANZ, we're going to have Westpac on Monday.
Right.
And we had the ASB Bank earlier this year because they have a different reporting season.
Right.
They report at the end of December. These guys are reporting at the end of March. So
good result yesterday for the ANZ, right? Up.
Yeah, the ANZ. Now, was it yesterday? It seems like it might have been earlier. I'm not sure if it was yesterday, as a matter of fact.
But how's the BNZ gone?
Well, the Bank of New Zealand, their profit was a little bit lower than it was the year earlier. But they thought the performance was still better than last year's because they measure, there's two ways that they measure their profitability. They're saying that basically that their cash profit measure was an improvement, whereas their net profit, which is the one we typically report, was down. So they were down 8% in terms of their absolute net profit to $416 million, which is still pretty good, whereas the cash profit measure was up 9% to $484 million.
Right. Where does their profit go, Nona? They're called the Bank of New Zealand. Who owns them?
They're owned by the National Australia Bank, NAB, and so the profit goes to NAB shareholders, and that's really true for all of the four biggest banks. They're all owned by Australian banks, so that's where their parents are. Yeah.
So a lot of profits going offshore, presuming the shareholders, the NAB shareholders.
Yes.
Yeah, well, they will be.
Well, but of course, don't forget though that New Zealand companies and fund managers and so on invest in banking in Australia. So it could be that New Zealand shareholders will indirectly have an exposure there through institutional investors and so on.
How did the markets react to all of this?
Well, first of all, the market was down almost a third.
Did I miss something? Have I missed a question that I should have asked you? No,
it's okay.
No, is there anything else we need to know? You've got lots of papers there that aren't about the BNZ. Is there something else we need to know?
Well, I was just going to say that we did talk to the Bank of New Zealand late this afternoon, and they're going to have to compete a little harder for deposits. So people who have some money to save in the bank might find they should shop around a bit because banks are looking to give you a little bit more interest on your deposits because it's cheaper than if they have to go overseas to get that money. Yeah. So, we always talk about what are the options for, regular punters. Shop around for a good deposit rate if you have some money to save because you might get a better deal.
Thanks, Nate.
And so on the markets, we were down about 0.33% today. 23 points down to 7,383. The New Zealand dollar took a bit of a hit overnight, mostly because the U.S. Federal Reserve indicated that they are still on track to hike interest rates, even though the U.S. economic data has been a little less, not as good as the New Zealand economic indicators in any case. But the U.S. Federal Reserve seems to think that they're going to still be on track. The markets are going to be watching really carefully for the labour data that comes out on early Saturday morning here in New Zealand time to see if that, in fact, is going to play out. Meanwhile, the New Zealand dollar fell slightly, but has been steady through the day at 68.8 US cents, 92.7 Australian and 53.4 British pence.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter here in the Auckland studio. Thank you very much indeed, Nona. A disease that damages plants, including pohutakawa, manuka and feijoa trees, has been found on mainland New Zealand for the first time. Myrtle rust is prevalent in eastern Australia and Tasmania and was discovered in Raoul Islands in late March this year. This isn't good news at all. Our political reporter May Heron has more.
The disease starts off as purple pustules under or on the tips of soft new leaves. It then turns into a bright yellow fungus. This distinct and easily spread disease is called myrtle rust and could cost millions of dollars to deal with. The Minister for Primary Industries, Nathan Guy, says a nursery in Kaikoura notified the ministry on Tuesday that 5 of its pohutakawa seedlings had the disease.
We don't know how widely spread it is in Kaikoura. Are we just focusing in on one particular small area in the nursery, or could it be further afield in Northland? So we need to, of course, find out. We need to get people on the ground to understand how widespread it is.
It's feared the incursion could have serious consequences for some native species, such as pohutakawa and rata. Mr Guy says there is particular concern for the feijoa and manuka honey industries.
We need heightened awareness right now. Obviously the feijoa season is underway, so our advice to anyone that's growing feijoas or has purchased any trees, particularly from the Myrtle family, from this nursery or other nurseries in the Kaikoura region, that they please go out and inspect their trees.
Since the Australian outbreak in 2010, the government says the disease has been expected to arrive in the country. It's thought the myrtle rust spores were brought to New Zealand by wind. The Conservation Minister, Maggie Barry, says the disease is very hard to eradicate and control.
We're so adamant that people shouldn't touch it because it is easily spread, and the Australians admit that their biggest mistake in the early days was allowing too many people through because it brushes against people's clothing, and at a certain stage of the sporing cycle it can be distributed by people, by animals, inadvertently.
The government says the Queensland fruit fly and the bacterial kiwi fruit disease, PSA, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and this disease could go the same way. The New Zealand First Leader and Northland MP Winston Peters says this is disastrous for his electorate and the government has not done enough to prepare for it.
Now, on the question of PSA, the government in the end had to front with money to compensate because they were seen to have allowed the entry to this country of the threat in the first place. And I think in this matter, just to keep on claiming it's windborne, that's how it's got here, is not good enough.
The government says anyone believing they have seen myrtle rust on plants in New Zealand should call MPI immediately. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Lots of feedback again on our coverage of the teaching of religion in schools. The school is officially closed during the lesson, hence the limit to the hours it is available. I opted my children out and they had none of the issues raised on the program. But opt-out is the wrong approach. These classes should be opt-in, and those children who choose to attend should do so out of the classrooms. The children who aren't taking these lessons should not have their education disrupted because they are secular. Lots of feedback along those lines. This from Frank in Raglan. When my first daughter started school 25 years ago, I sat in on a religious class. That day they were teaching Sodom and Gomorrah, so I withdrew my children. Later, with my 3 children withdrawn, I started Māori language classes for the few not attending the religious classes. I started Māori language classes within a few weeks, half the school. Luckily, a small school were coming to me for te rea rather than Bible classes. Success, says Frank. Olive says, in most schools, the children who opt out are supervised. They're losing instructional time. The teachers spend the time having a cuppa. Religious instruction should be offered as an after-school activity, not part of the school day. It is not part of the official New Zealand curriculum. And Hamish says, as I understand it, the school is in fact closed for the duration of the religious education lesson. In my day, it was always given first thing in the morning. And this school officially started at the end of the RE lesson. Can you check if this is still the case? We shall do that, Hamish. We think you are correct. No, Pippa's saying in my earpiece, you are right. Thank you so much. I'm just going to have a cough. Look away if you're watching. Thank you. The FBI has told a Senate committee he has no regrets about reopening. Sorry, the FBI director has told a Senate committee he has no regrets about reopening inquiry into Hillary Clinton's emails. Just days before last year's presidential election. James Comey says while he feels mildly nauseous that his decision might have influenced the result of the election and Hillary Clinton was cost the presidency because of it, he would make the same decision again. At the time, Mr. Comey did not reveal that dealings between the Trump campaign and Russia were also being looked into. From Washington, here's the BBC's John Sopel.
History is likely to judge that this law enforcement officer played a decisive role in determining the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Just days before polling, James Comey revealed the FBI had reopened its inquiry into Hillary Clinton's emails from when she was Secretary of State. He said he had no good options.
So I stared at speak and conceal. Speak would be really bad. There's an election in 11 days. Lordy, that would be really bad. Concealing, in my view, would be catastrophic. Not just to the FBI, but well beyond. And honestly, as between really bad and catastrophic, I said to my team, we've got to walk into the world of really bad.
So how does he feel now about the impact his intervention has had?
Look, this was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. But honestly, it wouldn't change the decision.
What's not in doubt is that his letter, 11 days before America voted, convulsed the campaign. Its significance can't be overstated. This was Donald Trump the day the news broke.
The investigation is the biggest political scandal since Watergate, and it's everybody's hope that justice at last can be delivered.
And Hillary Clinton has now made clear she believes that James Comey may have cost her the election.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
But Donald Trump on Twitter attacks Hillary Clinton and seemingly has a swipe at James Comey too. FBI Director Comey was the best thing that ever happened to Hillary Clinton in that he gave her a free pass for many bad deeds. The question is, why did the FBI make public the email investigation and not the parallel inquiry into the Trump campaign's links with Russia? The answer seems to be that Congress had been told the email investigation was complete and therefore reopening it needed Congress to be told again. It's an explanation that baffles many Democrats.
That's the BBC's John Sopel reporting from Washington. Home again with the time at 13.5 to 6. The Health Minister has defended stretched mental health services and promised more money in the upcoming budget. Jonathan Coleman launched a national improvement program today, but as Karen Brown reports, his critics say he's just tinkering and he's failing to deal with a crisis facing the mental health sector.
Jonathan Coleman is banking on a new national improvement program lifting standards in mental health. The program will limit seclusion, standardise drug prescribing, improve patient transfers and improve the physical health of those with mental health and addiction issues.
It's clear that we've got to strengthen up access to services in the community. That's the feedback we've had over time. Primary prevention and focusing on wellness and well-being and the complex drivers of mental health illnesses.
Dr Coleman says the 5-year program will cost $7.5 million, which will come from District Health Board funds. There's also the promise of more money in the May 25 budget for mental health, but he refuses to say how much or how it will be spent.
I can't reveal details of the overall package, but what I can say is there'll be more money for mental health in the budget, and the key thing is we're taking the social investment approach.
Dr Coleman says mental health and addiction issues need a broad multi-sector approach, and he defends the government's management of the issue, saying funding has risen by 18% since 2008 and there are more staff too.
100 more psychiatrists over 8 years. Mental health nursing has increased at a faster rate than any other area of nursing. So there are more resources, there's more money going into it.
The Health Quality and Safety Commission has led work on the new National Improvement Program. Its Acting Chief Executive, Karen Osborne, says it's definitely needed.
We know that some DHBs have put a considerable effort into improving the quality of their mental health and addiction services, but that's not consistent across the country.
But the PSA union says the social investment idea is worrying because it could target just a narrow group of people rather than all of those who need mental health services. PSA campaign worker Simon Osterman says funding increases haven't kept pace with the growing number of people who need help.
So it's not surprising that 9 in 10 people working in mental health feel under-resourced. We've had a 150% increase in the number of people coming to emergency departments with mental health issues, and the police are saying that they have record suicide calls.
Labour's health spokesperson David Clark says the new National Health Improvement Programme announcement is disappointing.
The Minister's announced today that he's doing a review that's not called a review, that is going to be reviewed in 3 years' time. And that is the extent of anything that he's announced of any substance on mental health in as long as I can remember.
That's echoed by the Greens health spokesperson Julie Ann Genter.
It's great the government is finally admitting that there is a real problem with our mental health system in New Zealand and it's not delivering for people. But I think it's going to take more than what they're promising to actually make a difference.
Julie Ann Genter is reiterating calls for a national inquiry to identify what's needed in mental health. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
The Crown says a preschool teacher wasn't coping with the stress of her job and at times used gratuitous violence by smacking children in her care to stop them doing things that annoyed her. Lynn Abraham is on trial at the Auckland District Court, charged with 11 counts of assaulting 9 children at the Bright Minds Childcare Centre in St John's. Today, the Crown and Defence summed up their cases. Our court reporter Edward Gay was there, and now he's here. Hi, Eddie. The Crown says, they tried to infer this yesterday, I think, but they said really explicitly today that Ms Abraham was under strain, right?
That's right. That's what the Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey said. She was the manager at the centre. She also had a hands-on role as a teacher, and Mr Dickey acknowledged that her job was stressful at times, but he said that this was a case about how she responded to that stress. He said that as well as hitting the children, she's accused of force-feeding some of them, sellotaping a 4-year-old's mouth shut when he was too noisy, and washing another child's mouth out with soap when he swore at another teacher. He said there was evidence from 3 of Miss Abraham's colleagues, and that evidence was generally consistent. All saw her hit the children.
Right. Brian Dickey was just doing the Dome Valley case in the High Court, right? This, then took the jurors through each of the charges here in the District Court.
That's right. He's a busy man, Mr Dickey. He said that on one occasion, Miss Abraham smacked a child who was running around. When that child cried, she's said to have told him, "You've got nothing to cry about." And Mr Dickey said that was gratuitous violence. Another charge relates to smacking a child who actually has learning difficulties when he cried and refused to pack up his pens. He's said to have then been smacked and told, "This is what you should cry for." Mr Dickey recounted the evidence of another teacher who said Miss Abraham was hit by a 2-year-old and she responded by hitting the child back. And Mr Dickey said the law's plain, you can't fight with a 2-year-old. He said another charge relates to a witness saying that she saw Miss Abraham forcing food into a 1-year-old's mouth and holding her hand over the baby's mouth, and that constitutes assault as well. A 4-year-old said to have been force-fed their own vomit.
So, the prosecution is painting a pretty vivid picture, but the defence is saying, hold on, none of this happened, right?
That's right. That's what Miss Abraham's lawyer, Graham Newell, said. He addressed that vomit allegation as well, and he said the witness, Jennifer Wong, she spoke English as a second language, and initially her evidence started off with, she used the phrase, the child threw out food. That changed to throw up, and later in her evidence she used the word vomit. Mr Newell said one of the charges that she sellotaped a child's mouth up is said to have happened back in 2012, and it took 3.5 years for Miss Abraham to be charged to actually hear that allegation. He pointed out the only Crown witness to give evidence on that allegation initially said it happened in 2016. She then changed to 2015 and then 2013 as well. He said that had to leave the jury in some state of doubt. He also addressed a charge relating to Miss Abraham washing the child's mouth out with soap, and he said that Miss Abraham actually, her evidence was she washed around the child's mouth. He finished his summing up by asking the jury if they could be sure of the evidence, if they couldn't be sure of the evidence, he said that they would have to be left in some doubt. Tomorrow the jurors will hear from Judge June Jallis. She'll sum up the case before they retire to consider their verdicts.
Edward Gay, our court reporter who was there. Thanks, Eddie. Really appreciate it. The time on Checkpoint is 6:30 To 6. Thank you for being with us. A 1-year-old bull terrier pup is looking for a new home after a car crash killed his owner on Saturday. 40-year-old Jeremy Carnahan died after his car plunged into the Buller River over the weekend. His black and white pup, Doggy, who was in the car at the time, was found curled up on a nearby riverbank. Somehow Doggy survived this accident. Buller District Animal Control Officer Tracy Judd is charged with rehoming Doggy, and earlier she told me what happened.
He got out of the car somehow, swum to the other side of the riverbank, and the jet boat just spotted him through. They shone their light over actually onto the riverbank and just seen a pair of eyes. So they went over, and here was the dog curled up in a wee ball on the dirt in the riverbank. So they chucked him in the boat and brought him up to me.
He would have been very distressed in every way because, one, he's been through a horrific experience himself, and two, he's lost his master.
Exactly, yeah, he was we couldn't get him to walk, we had to carry him, and he was just really shocked, and it was just, everyone was there. It was pretty upsetting. It was.
Yeah, I bet it was.
Yeah.
But bit by bit, he made a recovery.
He did. He went to the vets on the first night, on the Saturday night. He spent the night there because it's much warmer than the pound, and they just had a look at him. But he had a bit of blood on him, but no real injuries, just a bit stiff and sore. I picked him up on Sunday, took him to the pound, and he started eating and drinking, which was good when I hand-fed him, and slowly started wagging his tail and getting a bit happier as the days have gone by.
Well, that's your good care, Tracy.
Hopefully it is, something to do with it anyway.
Yeah, and then you decided to take his photo, and you said sit.
I did. I wanted to take a really nice photo of him because he's got these magic manners. He sits, he stays, he comes when he's called. I walk him off lead and he's just touching my leg the whole way. He never leaves my side.
He's been well trained.
He's been well trained, and I said sit, and he just sat down. I took that awesome photo of him. So
that's a lovely story, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how many volunteers now have you got to be Doggy's new mum and or dad?
We've got about 45, and the phone's just continuing to ring. But today he's going into his foster home, which is our local detective at the police station.
Yeah.
Is taking him because he's got 2 weeks leave, and he said, look, I'll take the dog, I'll pick him up today, and that gives me a chance to vet everyone and see who the best home is.
So wait a sec, your local detective
Our local detective at the police station, he's our foster home.
And just at the community station there in Westport?
Yep, he rang me and said, look, I'm on leave for 2 weeks, I'll take the dog home. I said, perfect. Gives me 5 minutes to vet everyone and take a breath and try and find the best home for him.
What a nice story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a nice story. It started with absolute sadness, but
Absolute, yeah.
It gets better as it goes on, the story, doesn't it?
It's going to get even better when he gets his forever home, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what's the criteria, Tracy, when you're judging where Doggy's going to go? What are you looking for?
Well, with him, we're looking for someone who's maybe semi-retired type people that can be home in the day or can take him in the ute because he just loves the vehicle. He's travelled all around with his owner in the vehicle. So just someone who can be with them a bit more in the day and he's not going to be a backyard pet with people that work all day because he really loves people.
Yeah.
Well, this dog, boy oh boy, it's just...
He's a good boy.
He's such a good dog, yeah. I mean, and the owner, the guy's done a really good job of. I mean, he's only a year old, so he's only a puppy, but he's done a really good job with him.
Yeah, sad story, but a lovely response to that dog looking up. With a sense of understanding, I felt at the camera. Lots and lots of feedback coming with the time at 2.5 minutes to 6 on the subject of teaching religious instruction at school. Why do they not offer other religious classes? Only Christian is wrong on so many levels, and lots of you saying that. Thank you for all your feedback, by the way. Richard says, I wonder how many primary schools in mainly Muslim countries have religious modules that explain how Christianity develops. Sally says, regarding RE in schools, when I was teaching, the official position was that classes were closed, not the schools. Children had to opt out, which I felt was really not on. By far, most children don't want to be seen as being different, so to avoid this, they attended. In my experience, it was not religious education, but fundamental Christian religious instruction. My son went briefly to religious instruction at school when he was 5 years old until he brought home a list of the 10 Commandments, including thou shalt not commit adultery. When I pulled him out of religious studies, the nice Christian teachers punished him. And re-religion in schools. My Kiwi Brit crossbred son was educated in the UK till age 8 and in New Zealand for 7 years from then till now. His multi-religious education in London was well-rounded and presented in an informative, real and modern way, non-secular, even discussing atheism with primary-age children. His classes celebrated Hanukkah, Diwali, Christmas, etc. Lots of fun, lots to learn, diverse food festivals and incredibly open-minded and informative. His learning taught us, his parents, a lot and has made him a tolerant, understanding, worldly child. He now balks at the dull and single-minded Christian education on offer here in New Zealand. Bribed by chocolate at the end of every opt-in class. Of course the kids go for it, cynically loving God's chocolate prize. Thank you for all of your feedback. People feel very strongly about this. We really appreciate hearing from you. Anna's standing by to bring us news in about 40 seconds. We still don't have a clue what's happening at Buckingham Palace, and nor does Richard Gaisford, who's a pretty venerable correspondent for Britain's ITV. He's just tweeted from his personal Twitter feed a shot of the camera crews and reporters that are now lining up outside Buckingham Palace. A pretty good smattering of them now, considering it's just going 7 o'clock, but no one has a clue what's going on. Speculation, conjecture, rumour, but nothing official at all. Remarkable state of affairs. The time is 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Ministry for Primary Industry says it will do everything in its power to stop the spread of a new disease that could devastate Pohutakawa and Manuka. Myrtle rust has been confirmed in young Pohutakawa in a kirikiri nursery, which is now in lockdown. The disease has been killing myrtle species in Australia and could also affect rata, eucalypts, bottlebrush, feijoa and guavas. MPI's Director of Readiness and Response, Jeff Gryn, says the ministry's been preparing for the arrival of the wind-blown pathogen since 2010. He says a team of 20 is now in Kirikiri to try to stop its spread, though the odds are not good.
That said, I have looked at the case studies of Australia and they believe they had an early opportunity in a nursery which they didn't actually take, and that is one of their regrets. We don't intend to have the same regret.
Jeff Gryn says MPI needs anyone who's bought a Pohutakawa or myrtle species from a kirikiri nursery in the past month to call its hotline. A review of security procedures at Christchurch Prison has been ordered. At the same time, the jail's head and 2 senior staff have been placed on special leave. In a statement, the Corrections Department's Southern Region Commissioner Ben Clark says he has recently become aware of potential non-compliance with security procedures at the prison. He has appointed another manager as head of the facility while a review is carried out. Mr Clark says although there is no suggestion the prison's security has been compromised, it's extremely important that all aspects of security procedures are complied with. Corrections is declining to comment further. Last year, an investigation was carried out into why an inmate was left unaccounted for in an exercise yard for 9.5 hours. The prisoner went on to self-harm. A lobby group is blasting Jerry Brownlee following his first overseas engagement as Foreign Minister today. Australia caught the New Zealand government off guard when it announced this week it would stop subsidising New Zealand tertiary students whose fees will now more than triple. Mr Brownlee met with his Australian counterpart Julie Bishop today, and he now says she's probably right that the changes, which include giving New Zealanders access to student loans, will lead to more New Zealanders accessing higher education there. The chairman of the lobby group Oz Kiwi, Timothy Gasson, says that's outrageous.
Government's response is to roll over, and not just to roll over on it and accept it, but to actually go out there, as Brownlee was today, and essentially take the Australian government's talking points and say, oh, well, how this isn't too bad because actually it'll encourage more Kiwis to go and study in Australia because of their generous student loan scheme. It's frankly a load of nonsense.
Timothy Gasson from the lobby group Oz Kiwi. The Queen's royal staff have reportedly been called from across the UK to an emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace. The Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror report that staff from the royal residences would be addressed by the Lord Chamberlain and the Queen's private secretary. Buckingham Palace has made no official comment. The Prime Minister Bill English says he has not been briefed on anything regarding Buckingham Palace. Protesters have again clashed with riot police and chaotic scenes in cities across Venezuela. Masked youths hurled rocks and firebombs in the capital, Caracas, as they led a march of thousands to the country's National Assembly. One person has been killed, the BBC's Candice Piet reports.
Police with riot trucks fired tear gas and rubber bullets on Caracas's main thoroughfare. Water cannon were used to push back a crowd of thousands, some of whom threw stones and petrol bombs. The leaders of the protest march say heavy-handed policing was designed to try and scare them into stopping their demonstrations. They're protesting against President Nicolas Maduro's creation of a new assembly with powers to rewrite the constitution, which they say will be used to avoid free elections. Mr. Maduro has said it will allow the country's opposing factions to begin a new dialogue.
Candice Piet reporting. Rescue workers in Iran have recovered 21 bodies after a huge explosion at a coal mine which left 69 people more injured. Another 32 miners are trapped underground at the mine in the northern province of Golestan. Some of those killed went in to try to rescue them and reach the injured. The mine blast is thought to have been caused by a gas leak. The death toll is expected to rise as emergency crews work to clear the mine tunnel. An Israeli man missing on the South Island's west coast has been found after spending 2 days in a national park. The police say the 40-year-old man entered the Paparoa National Park near Westport on Tuesday morning. He turned up in the car park about 3:30 this afternoon. He's having a medical check-up. The area has had strong southwesterly winds and rain, as well as near freezing temperatures. It's 6:05. The Kangaroos playmaker Cooper Cronk says the Kiwis lineup for tomorrow night's Rugby League test in Canberra is the most formidable international lineup he's seen. Tomorrow's match will be the final mid-year test played between the two, with a revamp of the international schedule underway. It will also be the final time the two sides play one another before the World Cup later this year. The 34-test veteran Cronk says Kiwis coach David Kidwell has selected an intimidating squad.
You think about their forward pack, Blair, Bromwich, Tomalolo, Packer, Tapau. Running off the back of that, you got Isaac Luke, Sean Johnson, Foran, Tuvasa Shek. And they're big names in the NRL and they're representing the Kiwis.
Cooper Cronk. Four-time badminton winner Sir Mark Todd, who was the best performed of his New Zealanders last year, finishing fourth, will compete on two horses, Leonidas and Campino. Andrew Nicholson also has two horses entered. Blythe Tate and Tim Price are also competing. Penalty shootouts in football could be changed to make them fairer under new plans being considered by UEFA. Instead of teams alternating spot kicks, UEFA is considering a new system similar to the tie-break in tennis. The idea is to stop the team going second having to always potentially play catch-up, with research showing the team taking the first penalty have an unfair advantage as they win 60% of shootouts. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Claire Anderson on convicts and penal colonies. Not just a British thing. Our changing world goes on a moth hunt. We meet the Faroe Islands Asian community. It's a long way from Bangkok to Tushavan. And this week's cultural ambassador Fergus Barrowman proves you can play Bartok with more than a bit of swing when he shares his latest pick of new jazz releases on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland and Auckland, fine spells and isolated showers clearing tomorrow. Waikato and Coromandel to Taranaki and Taihape, including the Bay of Plenty. Fine spells, a few showers mainly in the west, clearing early tomorrow morning. Gisborne too widened up as scattered showers developing south of Napier this evening with hail possible. Showers spreading north overnight, then clearing from the south tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, scattered showers developing this evening, clearing early in the morning. Marlborough and Nelson, Buller and Westland, a few showers clearing and fine weather tomorrow. Canterbury, a few showers becoming confined to Banks Peninsula this evening, then clearing early tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, a few showers clearing in Fiordland, Otago and inland Southland this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, showers easing tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it is 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thanks, Senator Thomas. I just want to point out that before, as we were trying to work out what the hell is going on in Buckingham Palace, the answer is we still don't know. You slowed down reading the weather as I was racing round.
Oh, yeah, some people may have thought I was just tired.
No, not at all. Well, I don't know what they thought, but I'm very grateful. Thank you for allowing me to get into the studio. Nice work,
Pleasure.
you. We want to update you on what's happening at Buckingham Palace. We haven't a clue. It's really interesting, though. The tabloids are reporting that an emergency meeting has been called. There's all sorts of speculation about what is happening, but the broadsheets and the BBC are not touching this story at all. Very, very bizarre state of affairs. The moment we hear anything, and who knows when that will be, because it is only 9 minutes past 7 in London, we will let you know. Thank you for being with us. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Jerry Brownlee has been accused of rolling over and buying the Australian government's line on its tertiary education changes that would triple the cost of getting a degree for some Kiwis. A couple of people have emailed in and said, why do we even care about this? These are expat New Zealanders. They've gone to Australia, c'est la vie. Well, the Foreign Affairs Minister met with his Australian counterpart, Julie Bishop, today in Sydney in a pre-budget announcement that caught the New Zealand government off guard. Canberra this week said it will stop subsidising Kiwis' tertiary education from next year and will instead treat them as international students. In a media conference following his meeting with Ms Bishop, Mr Brownlee said he now understands how difficult it is for a country to carry out bilateral negotiations when preparing a budget, and he believes the lack of communication is a one-off. His comments have infuriated the chairman of the lobby group Oz Kiwi, Timothy Gasson. He spoke to our political reporter, Benedict Collins.
So watching the press conference, we just thought, well, what a load of waffle, really. Brownlee got up there and essentially said, well, how lovely it was to be there, and what a great relationship we have, and what great mates we all are, and completely caved and said nothing, pretty much to criticise the fact that Australia had changed its policy. To the extent he seemed concerned at all, it was the fact that essentially the Australians hadn't given the New Zealand government sufficient notice of the fact they were going to screw over a whole lot of Kiwi students. Not the fact they were actually going to screw over Kiwi students. And I just find it remarkable that 15% of all New Zealand citizens live in Australia. They're all going to be impacted by this change that makes higher education for all of them much, much more difficult. And this fundamentally undermines the free movement of people for any purpose, whether that's to study, for work, for whatever across the Tasman. And he's just let this slide.
Right, you think he's just rolled over and a really weak response, yeah?
It's completely, I suppose, this thing is a completely flaccid response by the New Zealand government to this. And as has been reported today, talking about concerns about how this could be extended further. Obviously, there are no particular signs that it's going to be extended beyond tertiary education, but you just have to look at the pattern of events over the last 16 years. It started with Social Security back in 2001. Within a few years, the state governments were copying that and applying it state-based policies. If we see that same pattern now, within a few years you could be seeing Kiwi students at primary and secondary schools targeted for fees as well. Because the New Zealand government, this is by far the most substantial change that's happened since 2001. And the New Zealand government's response is to roll over, and not just to roll over on it and accept it, but to actually go out there, as Brownlee was today, and essentially take the Australian government's talking points and say, oh, well, how this isn't too bad because actually it'll encourage more Kiwis to go and study in Australia because of their generous student loan scheme. It's frankly a load of nonsense.
That's Timothy Gasson from the lobby group Oz Kiwi. He's speaking to our political reporter, Benedict Collins there. We have a lot of people who watch us and listen to us in Australia. If you are there, we'd love to hear from you about how you see your treatment as expat New Zealanders by the Australian government. Do get in touch, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Is concerned for the Fijoa and Manuka honey industries after a disease that damages plants was discovered on mainland New Zealand for the first time. Now, myrtle rust is prevalent in eastern Australia and Tasmania. It was discovered on Raoul Island in late March. The Minister for Primary Industries, Nathan Guy, says a nursery in Kirikiri notified the ministry on Tuesday that 5 of its pohutakawa seedlings had the disease. He says it's not clear how widespread the incursion is, but it's feared that it could cost millions of dollars and have serious consequences for some native species such as pohutakawa and rata if it does take. Mr. Guy says there is particular concern for the Fijoa and Manuka honey industries.
We need heightened awareness right now. Obviously the Fijoa season is underway, so our advice to anyone that's growing Fijoas or has purchased any trees, particularly from the Myrtle family, from this nursery or other nurseries in the Kerikeri region that they please go out and inspect their trees. It could well have an effect on the manuka industry. In Australia, it's taken sort of 3 or 5 years on average for it to show signs on the manuka trees over there. So it's a little bit early to understand the impact that it could have on the manuka industry.
Nathan Guy, the Conservation Minister Maggie Barry says the disease is very hard to eradicate and control.
It starts off as purple pustules on the underside or on the very tips of fresh growing shoots of Metrosideros, of Pahudakawa, of Rata. It then spreads to a bright yellow fungus, which is very easily disrupted, which is why we're so adamant that people shouldn't touch it, because it is easily spread. And the Australians admit that their biggest mistake in the early days was allowing too many people through, because it brushes against people's clothing, and at a certain stage of the sporing cycle it can be distributed by people, by animals, inadvertently.
Maggie Barry. It's 14 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Wellington is losing more than $1 million a week as a result of the Kaikoura earthquake, with no end currently in sight. That's one of several conclusions in a new report from financial firm Deloitte, highlighting the catastrophic impact a bigger earthquake would have on the capital, or one more directly located beneath the capital. It's urging central and local government to invest now to make the region more resilient to the next big one, rather than wait till after it strikes. Emile Donovan reports.
The report estimates an earthquake of similar magnitude to that in Christchurch 6 years ago would cost the capital nearly $30 billion over the next 13 years, cause unemployment to hit 10% and double the cost of home insurance. One of the report's authors, Deloitte partner Linda Mead, says the government and council need to think more about how to keep the city going should the big one strike.
It's more about thinking how the businesses would continue to operate in Wellington, employ people so that the people of Wellington could continue to live their lives and wouldn't feel like their only option was actually to leave the city.
Ms Mead and her co-author Kit Miyamoto, who heads the engineering firm Miyamoto International, say there needs to be investment in roads, rail and ports, and utilities like water and telecommunications to stop the city from grinding to a halt. The Finance Minister, Stephen Joyce, says he's addressing that by lowering the country's debt level, so if a serious earthquake were to hit, the government would be able to borrow and rebuild.
It is important that we have that capacity, and that's why I'm so focused on that, making sure that there's a debt capacity to respond, as we used in the most recent events.
But Deloitte's Linda Mead says the minister is taking a very narrow perspective.
The response that, we would rebuild and we'd have the capacity, that's an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We could do more now to invest to mitigate the likely cost to this country and do that now, rather than saying, we'll worry about fixing it after it happens.
She says building standards understandably focus on saving lives, but there's more to resilience than that.
The building code is designed, as I understand it, to protect loss of life first and foremost. It's not designed to enable businesses to keep on operating. There has to be a balance to this discussion. How do you enable a city not just to not fall down, but to bounce back?
The Wellington City Council's Resilience Manager, Mike Mendonça, says the report is helpful in keeping quake safety in the spotlight, but there's not much in the way of fresh information.
This is not news. We know we live with earthquake risk in Wellington. A number of models have been run previously, so this should not come as a surprise to anybody. The report failed to mention a bunch of the work that is already underway, but other than that, really, there was no surprise in there for us.
But Linda Mead says there's more talk than walk on getting things done.
We see things like resilience strategies being produced by the council, and that's great, but I actually haven't seen any really meaningful steps forward to address the issues around, for example, the level of disruption that you would expect to see from an event this size.
The Christchurch quake prompted a number of residents there to leave. A quick survey of Lambton Quay found most Wellingtonians have faith the capital would cope if a major quake struck, and they'd stick around.
I'm a Wellington born and bred. My husband's from Christchurch and was in both of them, so probably.
I'm going to say yes. We've got extended family here, so it's an important thing to kind of stick with the family. Yeah, I would. If I had a home to live in.
But most hope they don't have to find out. For Checkpoint, call Emile Donovan Tene.
A little bit of an update from Buckingham Palace. AP, Associated Press, are reporting, and I quote, royal household staff called to meeting, but And this is sourced as a quote from a Buckingham Palace source, no cause for concern. That's just from AP. So a meeting is taking place, but according to AP, Buckingham Palace is saying no cause for concern. Let's leave London and cross the channel to France. The two candidates in the French presidential election have traded insults in a heated final televised debate. Latest polls suggest the centrist candidate Macron is well ahead of his far-right rival Marine Le Pen, but the gap is narrowing. Both are making a final pitch for undecided voters who will cast their ballots on Sunday. A lot riding on this, obviously. The BBC's James Reynolds watched the debate and has this report.
For the first time, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen sat directly across from one another. Right from the start of this debate, they began their attacks.
Mr.
Macron is the candidate of savage globalisation, Uberisation, economic uncertainty, social brutality, of every man for himself.
You have shown you're not the candidate for a balanced democratic debate. The question is, do the people want your defeatist attitude? You say globalisation is too hard for us, so is Europe. Let's shut our borders, leave the euro, because others succeed, not us.
The atmosphere got heated. At times, the moderators barely managed to get a word in. I treat the French like adults, Mr. Macron told his opponent. You lie all the time. Then each was asked about terrorism.
The safety of our people, the fight against terror and Islamist extremism, you don't want to take it on. I know why. Against terrorism, we have to close our borders straight away, immediately. And that's what I'll do the moment I take power.
Closing borders achieves nothing. There are many countries outside the Schengen area that have been hit as hard as us by terrorist attacks. And since 2015, we have put back border controls to fight terrorism.
Marine Le Pen spent much of her time attacking her opponent. She avoided detailed discussion of her own proposals. Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen presented two very different visions of France, and theirs was a debate marked by attacks and accusations. And they now head out to the rest of the country for the final days of the campaign.
The BBC's James Reynolds reporting. The US President Donald Trump has set the stage for mass deportations with his planned crackdown on illegal immigration and undocumented workers. There are an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US, and their labour keeps much of America's agriculture and horticulture industry going. A large number of them have American-born children too. Some are brought in legally on special visas, but it's estimated as much as 70% of the farm workforce is illegal. So, as undocumented workers fear for their future, so too do many farmers. The ABC's Connor Duffy has this report from Central Florida.
Hank Scott has been farming the sandy soil on his Florida property for half a century. He tells us he just can't get American workers into the fields anymore.
They might get out here. Well, we've tried it. We've done it over the years. 50-some years we've been doing this. And they may get out here and they may last an hour. They may last a half a day. I've never seen any of them last more than a day.
Latino workers have saved the day and blast music from a speaker as they move quickly through the fields bunching kale for market. Farmers rely on them. Some are on legal visas, but as many as 70% nationwide are estimated to be undocumented. Hank Scott voted for President Trump and supports his tough-on-crime policies and moved to hire thousands of immigration officers to better enforce the law. He worries it could come at a cost to his harvest, though.
We've seen what it has done to the growers in Alabama and Georgia and North Carolina, where farmers have left entire crops in the field because they've lost all their help.
For the workers themselves, the stakes are even higher. Olivia Flores lives nearby in a pop car. She snuck across the border from Mexico 18 years ago. She's moved on from farming to reception work. She says President Trump's tough stance means many workers are afraid to leave the house, worried that even the smallest interaction with authorities will see them deported.
They live every day with fear. They don't want to go to the stores to get the
food for the children. They don't want to show the face outside of the home because they think everybody just to see the face, they think they're going to be deported.
Olivia Flores has 3 children who all have US citizenship. Her daughter Yesenia says she and her siblings worry they could be left alone in the US.
When we come home from school, or we don't see her at home, then we get all scared, and then we're like, we don't have a parent. And in our family, in this case, our father has been deported, and we only have our mother.
The Flores family and many others get support from the Hope Community Centre, a Catholic-run charity. Sister Anne Kendrick helped set up the centre in 1971.
Without hesitation, actually, I would say that this is the worst time, that the community is suffering more severely than ever.
Sister Kendrick is 72. As we spend the day with her, she never seems to stop working as she assists migrants with everything from legal assistance to food, and sometimes just a sympathetic ear.
An 8-year-old little boy yesterday, we were talking to him, and then just out of nowhere, he just started to sob. What if they take my mom away and I come home from school and nobody's there? What's going to happen to me?
She's predicting things will only get busier.
Lots of feedback. That was from the ABC's Connor Duffy, by the way, from Florida. Lovely report. Lots and lots of feedback coming in again tonight. And we were talking about people who were listening to us from abroad, where they're living now. We have a delightful listener in Raleigh. It's spelt Raleigh, but I think it's Raleigh in the United States, and struggling to get us on shortwave tonight, I think, but we are always stoked that you're there. Thank you for being with us from Raleigh. Lots of people contacting us on pretty rough treatment of New Zealanders in Australia. Hi, John. Aussies can vote here, Kiwis can't vote there. Aussies get social welfare benefits here, Kiwis don't. Over there, Aussies get favourable student education here, but Kiwis are treated as any other foreigner there. Why are we still treating Aussies so generously? Cheers, Reese. Hi, John. Everyone seems to be missing the point that the raising of university fees is just one more example of the Australians unilaterally breaking the CER agreement. Our politicians have been spineless, if not complicit in this. Brownlee is as useful in his current role as he was with the rebuild of Christchurch. Absolutely useless, says Stephen, sent with loud effect. I think loud effect is a program of some description, but it was quite also a loud effect email, Stephen. Thank you. Good evening, John. Jerry Brownlee, what can you say? 2 days in the job, and he has rescinded New Zealand's brave stance at the UN Security Council on Israel's illegal settlements, and now totally compliant with the Australian government on university fees for New Zealanders living in Oz. More a lapdog than a foreign minister. Roll on the election, and hopefully New Zealand gets a foreign minister with real guts. Great program, John, from Graham in Whangarei. Thank you, Graham in Whangarei. Is Brownlee's / Nationals response to Australia's increased tertiary fees an attempt to influence public acceptance of the bill Paul Goldsmith has that wants to privatise tertiary education in New Zealand? This needs to be an election issue. Lots of feedback on this. Hello, re-fees for NZ expats studying in Oz. Not all of them live in Australia. Don't forget that a high number of New Zealanders go to Australia specifically and only to undertake no fee study, especially postgraduate and PhD students. I had forgotten that. Thank you, Louise. I personally know 2 people who are planning to do their PhD via an Australian uni via distance, i.e. remaining living in New Zealand, both of whom have already put their plans on hold. Reason for studying through an Australian uni is the free study opportunities plus the lack of suitable supervisors here in New Zealand. Clearly that could be the case in some PhD courses. Plus we have reciprocal agreement with Australia, says Marlene in Whangarei. Sorry, I hope one of them is right. Australians coming to New Zealand still get all the benefits that New Zealand are now not getting in Australia. There's an agreement. This is why we should care about it. Brownlee sucks. Love you guys. Thank you very much indeed for your feedback, and so much of it tonight. Let's go to a floating apple orchard and a garden on a 40-metre barge, which is docked in New York City's East River. The concept aims at creating a unique public space where people can walk and pick fresh herbs and vegetables for free and just be in the garden and away momentarily from the hubbub. Roselle Chen from Reuters has more.
A floating apple orchard and garden bob on the East River and await the public on a barge previously used to haul sand in Brooklyn, New York. Swale, a floating food forest, and cider company Strongbow collaborated to create a space where people can pick fresh food from their garden for free.
So in the city now, there are 100 acres of community garden space, but there are actually 30,000 acres of park space, and we imagine, you know, this could be a potential for food sources and for especially fresh, healthy, delicious food that parks could adopt. So we wanted to inspire the Parks Department. So we could do this edible food forest legally on the water in New York City, but not yet on public land. So that's really what we're reaching for, is to influence public land and to see if this works well. It could be a model for New York City's public spaces.
Once people walk on the barge, they're greeted with the smell of chocolate. That's because Mattingly uses mulch from a Brooklyn chocolate maker taken from the shell of the cocoa bean. And Swale is also self-sustainable.
So we worked with a scientist to devise a system where we can pull water from the East River and clean it and use it to water the plants. So the whole system is pretty much here. It's like all of these plants are perennials, so they come back stronger every year. The soil increases in health the more that the perennials work with it, and we use the river water.
People are welcome to walk on the barge and pick herbs, fruit, and vegetables, and in the fall, apples from their apple trees growing on a small hill. The food forest is open to the public and will stay docked at Brooklyn Bridge Park's Pier 6 through June 30th, with events promoting gardening and urban food forestry. Swale will later journey to the Bronx to Concrete Plant Park and will settle at Hudson River Park in the fall.
Roselle Chen from Reuters with that rather lovely story full of gorgeous pictures from New York. Returning to London now, what on earth is going on with Buckingham Palace? Well, the Queen's Press Secretary, or one of them, has just called back our very tenacious and singular producer, Bridget Burke. He says a meeting such as this is rare but not unprecedented, and he has ruled out a royal death. If you're just tuning in, this began with the Daily Mail saying an emergency meeting had been called. Well, emergency meetings happen, but that the Queen's staff, and there are quite a large number of them, have been summoned from far and wide to attend it at very short notice. Now, the Daily Mail reported this, none of the broadsheets picked up on it. The BBC still hasn't really picked up on it. But the story provoked enormous speculation. If you're outside Buckingham Palace now, there are a whole lot of reporters there doing live crosses. In fact, we've got a shot from about an hour ago from an ITV reporter who just wandered along the people as they were arriving. This was just after 6 a.m. But Buckingham Palace is now saying, yes, the emergency meeting is happening, but there is nothing to be concerned about. We do hope that is the case. Thank you for joining us on Checkpoint. We really appreciate your company. On behalf of our excellent team, we'll be back tomorrow at 5. A very good